Three motorcycles sitting in my driveway, engines humming like a low, mechanical growl, and my wife's voice on the other end of the phone sounding like a frayed wire. That's not exactly how I planned for my Tuesday to go. If you told me a month ago that a few patches of native milkweed and some purple coneflowers would lead to a tactical standoff and a federal corruption case, I would have told you that you'd been watching too many cheap thrillers on basic cable. But here we are, and looking back at the way things went down, I've realized that some people dawn into oppos. T just want a manicured lawn, they want absolute, soul-crushing control, and when they dawn into oppos, T get it, they dawn into oppos. T just sent a fine, they sent a message. It all started with a crisp, white envelope from the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, the kind of mail that feels heavy with bureaucratic self-importance before you even open it. My wife, Sarah, was standing in the kitchen, holding the letter with two fingers like it was radioactive, and when she read it out loud in that, corporate cleanup, voice of hers, I knew we were in for a ride. See, Sarah spent 15 years as a forensic accountant for the Department of Justice, tracing money for federal prosecutors. So when the HOA president, a woman named Victoria Vance, sent us a citation for, unauthorized landscaping modifications and violation of community aesthetic standards, she didn't in oppos. T just see a fine, she saw a challenge. Victoria was the kind of woman who wore her status like a suit of armor. Silver hair perfectly coiffed, expensive pearls always catching the light at the monthly meetings, and she'd been running Willow Creek like her own private fiefdom for 6 years. She wasn't an oppos, to use the people saying, no, and she certainly wasn't an oppos, to use to someone like Sarah, who could smell a lie through 3 layers of legal jargon. We planted a bee-friendly native garden because we actually care about the local ecosystem, and according to Section 8.4 of our own bylaws, it was perfectly legal, but Victoria decided it was an eyesore. I remember Sarah sitting at the dining room table that night, her glasses pushed up on her forehead, spreadsheets spread out like a battle map, and she looked at me and said, Leo, it's not about the flowers, She'd been digging through the HOA's public financial disclosures, the stuff they bury in 200-page PDFs that nobody ever reads, and she'd found something that made her eyes go cold. She pointed to a line item for, community liaison services, a cool $42,000 paid out over 8 months to a company that didn't in oppos. T seemed to have a website, a physical office, or even a functional phone number. I've spent my life in private security after 10 years in the Army Rangers, so I've seen my share of, ghost companies, and this had Victoria Vance's fingerprints all over it. The real fireworks started at the Thursday night board meeting, a humid evening where the air in the community center felt thick with tension and the smell of cheap coffee. Victoria was sitting at the head of the table, looking down her nose at the 20 or so residents who'd showed up, and when she called on Sarah to discuss our, landscaping noncompliance, she expected a submissive apology. Instead, Sarah stood up with a folder that was organized with the kind of terrifying precision only a federal auditor can manage. She didn't into oppos. T just argue about the flowers. She systematically dismantled Victoria's legal authority, quoting environmental statutes and precedent cases until the room went dead silent. But the moment the temperature really dropped was when Sarah shifted her gaze from the garden to the community liaison, fees. She asked very calmly, very politely, why the neighborhood was paying $42,000 to a firm registered to a P.O. box in a different county while our streetlights were still flickering and the pool deck was cracking. You could see the mask slip just for a second, a flash of genuine, sharp-edged panic in Victoria's eyes before she regained her, neighborhood queen, persona, and told us the matter was administrative and not open for discussion. That night, Victoria wasn't into oppos. T just an annoyed neighbor anymore. She was a cornered animal with a lot to lose. I told Sarah to be careful. I told her that people with expensive secrets dawn in oppos. T just go away, but I dawn into oppos. T think either of us expected what happened next. I was 25 minutes away at a security consultation when I got the text from Sarah, 3 guys on bikes. My driveway. They aren't in oppos. T leaving. My heart didn't in oppos. T just race. It turned into a lead weight. I've been in high-stakes situations all over the world, but nothing makes your blood turn to ice like knowing your wife is alone while three strangers are marking their territory on your front porch. I told her to lock the doors, stay away from the windows, and call the cops if they even touched the doorknob, and then I broke every speed limit in the county getting home. When I pulled onto our street, I saw them. Three guys, leather jackets, heavy boots, and motorcycles that looked like they cost more than my first house. They were leaning against their bikes, looking at our house like they were deciding which window to break first. The guy in the middle, the leader, was a mountain of a man, late 20s, with a scar running through his eyebrow and shoulders, so wide he looked like he was built out of concrete blocks. I pulled my truck in, blocking them in the driveway, and stepped out with the kind of practiced, lethal calm that only comes from years of wearing a uniform. I didn't oppose. TL, I didn't oppose. T waved my arms. I just walked up to them and looked the big guy right in the eye. And quote, "You have exactly 3 minutes to get these bikes off my property," and quote. I said, my voice low enough that they had to lean in to hear it. The big guy, who I later found out went by the name Jax, let out a dry, humorless laugh, but I could see his eyes darting to my hands, checking for a weapon, checking my posture. He was used to scaring suburban dads who spent their weekends at Home Depot, not guys who'd spent their 20s clearing rooms in hostile territory. And quote, "We're just here to talk about your wife's hobby, Leo," and quote. He said, and the fact that he knew my name and what Sarah was doing told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't an oppose. A random intimidation tactic. This was a targeted hit. He started talking about how, and quote, "Smart ladies," and quote, "shooting in oppose." Dig into things they don and oppose. Understand and how, and quote, "accidents," and quote, "happen in quiet neighborhoods like this." I looked at my watch. And quote, 2 minutes, and quote, I said. His two buddies, a wiry guy with nervous eyes and a kid who looked like he'd never seen a real fight in his life, started moving to my flanks. They thought they were being tactical, but they were telegraphing every move like a bad silent movie. Jax stepped closer, trying to use his height to bury me, and he reached out to grab my collar, probably thinking a little, in quote, physical persuasion, in quote, would end the countdown. That was his first mistake. In one fluid motion, I caught his wrist, applied a joint lock that sent him to his knees, and used his momentum to pivot. The wiry guy lunged with a telescopic baton, but I'd already disarmed him before he could even flick it open, and the third kid just froze, his eyes wide with the realization that they'd brought a knife to a gunfight, metaphorically speaking. Jax was pinned against the hood of his own bike, his face pressed into the leather seat, and I leaned in close to his ear. In quote, "Time's up," in quote, I whispered. But instead of the defiant snarl I expected, Jax's shoulders slumped, and he let out a jagged breath that sounded more like a sob than a threat. In quote, "Man, just on an oppose. Call the cops, okay?" I didn't oppose. Want to do this. My mom, she told me you were trying to ruin her life. End quote. I froze. My brain did a quick backflip, connecting the dots I'd missed. I let go of his arm, and he slumped onto the pavement, looking less like a biker thug and more like a lost kid who'd been handed a script he couldn't and oppose. Read. End quote. "Your mom?" End quote. I asked, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with a sickening thud. Jax's real name was Jackson Vance. Victoriason. The end quote. Community liaison, end quote, company? That was Jackson's name on the registration, but he didn't and oppose to even know it. Victoria had been using her own son's criminal record, a few youthful mistakes that had left him with a felony and no job prospects, to trap him into doing her dirty work. She'd been laundering HOA funds through a company in his name, pocketing the cash, and then telling Jackson that the end quote, mean lady at number 42, end quote, was going to send him back to prison if he didn't and oppose. Scare her off. It was the most cold-blooded thing I'd ever heard. This wasn't an oppose. Just neighborhood corruption. It was a mother weaponizing her own child to protect a few $100,000 in stolen property. We ended up sitting on my back patio, not as enemies, but as the strangest group of conspirators you've ever seen. Sarah came out with a legal pad and a carafe of coffee, her professional, in quote, interrogation mode, in quote, fully engaged, and for the next 3 hours, Jackson spilled everything. He wasn't an oppose. A thug. He was a guy who'd been dealt a bad hand and was being held hostage by a mother who cared more about her pearl necklaces than his future. He told us about the kickbacks Victoria was getting from the new paving contract, the consulting fees, she was paying to city council members to keep them from auditing the HOA, and the secret ledger she kept in a floor safe in her master closet. He even had photos of the checks. The next morning, we didn't oppose. T called the HOA board. We called the district attorney's office. Seeing Victoria Vance being led out of her $800,000 home in handcuffs while the morning sun hit those same pearls was a kind of justice you usually only see in the movies. She didn't oppose. T looked like a queen anymore. She looked like a small, bitter woman who'd realized that her subjects had finally stopped being afraid. The whole network came down. 2 city councilors resigned. The management company was dissolved, and the Willow Creek HOA was reorganized from the ground up. Jackson got a plea deal for his cooperation, and Sarah and I, well, our wildflower garden is blooming like crazy this year. It turns out that when you stop the poison at the root, the rest of the ecosystem tends to heal itself. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it, Oppose? How many people in your own neighborhood are hiding something behind a white picket fence and standard appearance manual? Would you have the guts to keep digging if you knew who was really watching from across the street? Or is a quiet life worth more than the truth? Drop a comment and tell me. Would you have stood your ground? Or would you have pulled up the flowers just to keep the peace?